Friends of Islam, this time the Islamic faith is back before you to share Islamic information. I hope it inspires your activities today, and don't forget to click the subscribe button and activate the bell button notifications so you don't miss the latest news from the Islamic Faith channel. A Muslim acquaintance pretended to be friendly and asked about the schedule of Islamic religious studies at a nearby mosque, saying, "I want to learn more about this faith. Can I join in the lecture?" After getting the information, Samuel went home and called a colleague. Laughing softly, he said over the phone, "I'll sneak in and find a loophole to prove that their teachings are weak." In the afternoon, he did a quick research by reading some Islamic books and watching online lectures. He then wrote down every point he thought could be used as a weapon in the debate, muttering, "I have to use this properly so it looks natural." That night, he made a plan to disguise himself as a convert by preparing fake documents, including a new name he had chosen, Salman Ridwan. He then gave the name to a shadow notary to help create a fake identity. The next morning, he arrived at a mosque and met with the mosque administrator. He politely introduced himself as someone who was new to Islam, then said, "Let me introduce myself. I am Salman Ridwan. I want to learn the basics of Islam." Receiving a warm welcome from the congregation, Samuel began to join the congregational prayer with still stiff movements. Meanwhile, the mosque administrator guided him in reciting prayers and light dhikr while saying, "Don't worry, we'll learn it slowly." Towards noon, he sat down with several ustads to talk about the pillars of Islam. With great enthusiasm, he pretended to be amazed, then added, "Very interesting. I hope to be able to study this further." After the conversation, he wrote down all the important points he heard, then sent a short message to his colleagues who were waiting. "My news has come in, just waiting for the right moment to reveal their weaknesses," he wrote without guilt. That night, he meditated in his office while researching ways to challenge the concept of monotheism. He devised a strategy so that he could ask questions in a trap without arousing suspicion, then whispered, "Soon, all of this will be revealed." After confirming his disguise as Salman Ridwan, Samuel became more active in attending mosque activities. Many people began to like him because of his pretend friendliness. One of the congregation members said, "You have adjusted so quickly, may Allah make it easy." During the pre-dawn prayer study, he carefully noted down the evidence on the virtues of monotheism. Then, during the question and answer session, he asked a question that led to a theological debate. He said, "How can we prove that the Quran is a revelation and not made by humans?" A cleric answered with a quote from a verse and a detailed explanation, using sentences that soothed the heart. Sincerely, he said, "We will gain wisdom, God willing, with knowledge and sincerity." Samuel only smiled faintly, then observed a convert who had just embraced Islam a week ago. He planned a trick question. "How was your experience when you decided to embrace Islam? Did you have no doubts about your old religion?" The convert answered confidently that he felt extraordinary peace. He then closed his statement with a sentence full of conviction. "There is not the slightest doubt." Because guidance comes through the Quran, Samuel had difficulty refuting it directly. That night, he collected all the notes that he thought were strange or difficult to understand, then studied the literature related to fiqh and tafsir. While occasionally joking in front of the mirror, he said, "I will make this proof of the inconsistency of their teachings." The next day, he repeated the routine of praying in congregation at the mosque, then asked about differences of opinion between one school of thought and another, hoping to find contradictions. He then asked, "If these opinions differ, doesn't that indicate the imperfection of Islam?" A cleric smiled, then explained that differences of opinion are a blessing, not a deficiency. Then the cleric gave an example of how the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave space for ijtihad for his companions. Smiling, he said, "The basis remains the same. Differences of opinion do not invalidate the truth of Islam." Samuel just nodded, then left the mosque to call his colleague. In a convincing tone, he emphasized that he had found a fatal weakness in Islamic teachings, but would continue to dig deeper. However, in his heart, Samuel began to feel confused. Every doubt he raised was always answered logically and satisfactorily. Nevertheless, he continued with his bad plan. Closing the book, he whispered softly, "I must be able to know all the weaknesses." After months of building an image as a diligent convert, Samuel managed to gain the sympathy and support of the mosque congregation. Until one day, a community leader suggested that he join the upcoming Umrah group, then exclaimed, "If you have the fortune, go to the Baitullah. That will increase your faith." Samuel, who was actually looking for an opportunity to defile the holy place, pretended to be moved when he received the offer. With a trembling voice, he replied, "Thank you. I am very grateful for this opportunity. I am grateful to have been given a way to Mecca. May I become more steadfast in Islam." The mosque group immediately registered Salman Ridwan's name at the travel agency, then helped prepare the passport and visa documents. Meanwhile, he secretly inserted certain items for his dark plan. Muttering softly, he said, "That's where everything will be revealed." When he arrived at the airport on the day of departure, he met dozens of other pilgrims who already knew him as someone who was diligent in studying religion. A teenager cheerfully greeted him, "Mr. Salman, may this Umrah be a blessing for you." On the plane to Jeddah, he sat next to a cleric who gently explained the procedures for the Umrah. The cleric reminded him, "Arranging your intention and saying it is the main thing. May we all get Allah's blessing." Samuel had a serious face, as if he was listening attentively. However, in his mind, he was planning steps to carry out the act of harassment he had planned. Then he took a sip of water while exclaiming, "Hopefully I can carry out my worship smoothly." Several hours later, they landed and headed straight for Mecca. After placing their belongings at the accommodation, the ustaz invited the group to perform prayers at the Grand Mosque. Smiling, he said, "This is the holy mosque that we miss." Samuel pretended to be amazed when he saw the Kaaba for the first time. He walked with the group towards the Tawaf area, then muttered softly, "Subhanallah, how great." However, the evil intentions behind his words were unreadable to others. On the way to the Black Stone, a congregation explained the importance of kissing the stone as part of the Prophet's sunnah. He said, "This stone was kissed by the Messenger of Allah, so we imitate him." Samuel nodded with a look full of deceit. He believed that his actions near the Hajar Aswad would prove his belief that Islam was just a symbol without power. With a small smile, he whispered, "Hopefully no one will suspect anything later." Towards evening, the group rested at the hotel. While the others were asleep, Samuel secretly opened his bag to check the items he would use. Inside, there were insulting notes that he intended to insert in the Hajar Aswad area. While staring at the objects, he whispered to himself, "Soon. This is proof that I dare to desecrate the holiest place for Muslims." The next day, they left for the Grand Mosque to continue the series of worship. A member of the group asked in a friendly manner, "Mr. Salman, are you ready to perform the Sunnah Tawaf today?" Samuel answered with a nod and a smile, then followed the congregation into the Tawaf area. While patting his shirt pocket, where he kept the cursed notes, he muttered softly, just waiting for the right moment. During the second round of Tawaf, he began to approach the corner of the Kaaba, preparing to carry out his evil intentions. However, the crowd of worshippers made it difficult for him to move until a security officer reminded him, "Don't push. Go with the flow patiently." Samuel pretended to hold back, then stood on the side to find a gap. He waited until the situation was a little quieter, while observing the position of the Hajar Aswad, which was tightly guarded by officers. Whispering softly, he said, "It's not easy to break through this line." When he saw a gap, he squeezed between the congregation who were reciting dhikr, then quickly moved closer to the Black Stone. He briefly met a guard who said firmly, "Perform your worship properly. Don't push." In the next few seconds, Samuel moved closer to the Black Stone, raising his hand as if he was going to kiss the stone with respect. While saying softly, "This is the time to complete the plan," his hand prepared to insert a note of insult. However, before his hand could sink to where he was aiming, another congregation member accidentally pushed his shoulder because they both wanted to get closer. He almost fell, while several people shouted, "Watch out! Don't push!" In the chaos, he finally managed to get his face closer to the Black Stone. With a quick movement, he tried to spit on the Black Stone secretly while slipping a note into the gap between the Kaaba's covers. While muttering coldly, he said, "Look, your religion is powerless." But at that very moment, he felt an unbearable burning sensation spreading from the Black Stone to his face. He jerked back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The congregation around him turned. surprised to see the terrified expression on Samuel's face, although they did not know what was really happening. In a half-unsteady condition, Samuel was pushed back by the flow of worshippers who were trying to kiss the black stone in an orderly manner. A security guard shouted, "Are you okay? Don't push yourself." He was unable to answer. The heat spreading from his face seemed to make his entire body shiver. Several worshippers stared at him in surprise, while a middle-aged woman exclaimed, "Oh my God, why is he like that?" When a guard tried to help him up, Samuel fell to his knees, holding his face, which was starting to look black in some parts. He groaned, "Help! Something is wrong here." However, his voice was getting hoarse. The people around him just thought he was exhausted or dehydrated. They immediately called for medical personnel, while a congregant led him away from the crowd, saying, "Come on, let's take him to a more open area." On the way to a quieter area, he felt a burning sensation that became worse. Finally, he screamed in pain in front of the officers, causing several people to stop their activities in shock. "What happened to this man?" they shouted. A health worker immediately tried to check his body temperature, but the thermometer showed no significant changes. In fact, Samuel's skin looked like it was blistered. The officer said confusedly, "The device is normal, but his condition looks serious." Stuttering, Samuel groaned, begging to be taken to the nearest hospital. One of his fellow convoy members immediately helped, saying, "Come on, let's take him now." "Hold on a moment. God willing, we will find a doctor for you." Throughout the journey, he continued to hold his face, which felt increasingly hot, until some of the congregation began to smell something burning. One of them shuddered and exclaimed softly, "This is scary. I hope nothing bad happens." As soon as he arrived at the emergency unit, the doctors and nurses who treated Samuel looked surprised. His burns looked like they were the result of direct exposure to fire, but there was no known source of fire. Samuel only groaned in pain without being able to explain what had actually happened, while closing his eyes tightly. The medical staff immediately provided first aid, but they did not find a clear cause. One of the doctors said to his colleagues, "This case is strange. We need further examination." Meanwhile, Samuel lay helpless in the observation room. A doctor tried to calm him down, injecting painkillers while his body continued to shiver. Then the doctor commented, "We will do a laboratory test. Hopefully there will be clarity soon." Several nurses tried to clean the injured area on Samuel's face, but they found that his skin was peeling and turning black quickly. One of the nurses said in a confused tone, "This looks like a high-grade burn, even though we didn't find any extreme heat source." Samuel was lying in bed, still unable to move freely because every touch caused excruciating pain. Not long after, an officer from the Umrah group came to visit him and said, "We all pray for you to recover soon." In an anxious atmosphere, another pilgrim who saw Samuel's condition remembered that he had fallen around the Hajar Aswad. Hesitantly, he asked the nurse quietly, "Was this due to being pushed by the pilgrim until he hit or was stepped on?" The nurse answered hesitantly, "We don't know for sure either, but there are no signs of broken bones or wounds from serious impact. What we found were burns, and that's what makes this case feel strange. We are still investigating it. This is beyond our reasoning," said the doctor. Although there was no definite diagnosis yet, the medical team concluded that Samuel's condition was getting worse. They decided to move him to an isolation room to prevent infection. In a firm voice, the doctor ordered his team, "Make sure sterile protocols are carried out strictly." Not long after, a cleric from the Umrah group came to visit. He looked at Samuel with pity, then said softly, "Be patient. Always remember Allah." However, Samuel only groaned softly, his face full of pain. Meanwhile, a security officer at the Grand Mosque began to collect statements from witnesses. He asked if Samuel had done anything near the black stone. One of the congregation answered hesitantly, "I only saw him kissing the black stone." Then suddenly he screamed in pain. On the other hand, Samuel's physical condition was getting weaker, while the heat on his face did not subside. Towards evening, the medical team increased monitoring, installed respiratory support equipment, and painkillers. While observing Samuel's condition, the doctor on duty said, "His condition is critical. Hopefully there will be progress tomorrow." As the room lights dimmed, Samuel's groans of pain could be heard throughout the hospital corridor, making several visitors shiver. A nurse passing by muttered, "May God help him." In the morning, doctors found that the burns on Samuel's face had begun to spread to his neck and chest. A senior doctor told his team, "We need more intensive action, but there is no standard method for a condition as strange as this." When a nurse was about to change the bandage, she was shocked to see the condition of the wound that looked worse, as if it was burning from the inside. Because when opening the bandage, some of Samuel's skin stuck to the cloth. A nurse exclaimed, "Oh my God, this condition is getting worse." While immediately asking for help, her colleagues were shocked to see the decay around the wound, even though it had not been 24 hours. Another nurse covered her nose because of the pungent smell and said fearfully, "It seems like there is an unusual infection." Meanwhile, a ustaz from the group returned, stood beside his bed and prayed for Samuel. In a soft voice, he said soothingly, "May you recover soon. Don't give up hope." However, Samuel was unable to respond. Without saying much, the doctor ordered a series of additional tests. However, the results were still confusing because they did not show any clear pathogens or medical causes. The doctor finally said, "This is beyond our knowledge." That night, Samuel groaned loudly, indicating that his suffering was getting worse. As if seeing something frightening, Samuel struggled until several medical officers were forced to restrain him. A doctor immediately said, "Please prepare a sedative. He is very restless." When the sedative was injected, his body calmed down for a moment. However, not long after, he screamed again at the top of his lungs, begging for help with incoherent words. "Help! Help! Hot! Burning! Let me go!" A hospital guard who was watching from behind the glass shuddered in horror at the sight. With a pale face, he muttered, "I have never encountered anything like this in all my time here." As Samuel's condition continued to worsen, the medical team increased the dose of painkillers. However, his body's reaction remained the same. Finally, a specialist doctor said in a serious tone, "We have done our best. Now only a miracle can help him." Several Umrah pilgrims from the Mosque group held a prayer together in the hospital lobby. Without knowing the real problem, they only asked for his recovery. One of them said, "May Allah show mercy." On the third day of treatment, Samuel's blackened skin began to crack, oozing a foul-smelling fluid. A male nurse screamed in surprise, "This is beyond the condition of a normal burn." Specialists were immediately called. However, every examination only resulted in a dead end. There was no natural cause that could explain this extreme decay. Then the doctor shook his head. "Medically, this is really strange." The local security officers became increasingly suspicious. They coordinated with colleagues at the Grand Mosque to check the CCTV footage. One officer said, "We have to know what really happened near the Hajar Aswad at that time." On the other hand, several worshippers who had caught Samuel were seen whispering to each other. Some suspected that he had committed a serious mistake. One worshipper commented, "He was suspicious from the start, but we have no evidence." That afternoon, Samuel's condition reached a critical point. His blood pressure dropped drastically, and he began to make hoarse sounds like someone dying. A doctor immediately installed a defibrillator, then shouted tensely, "Get ready for resuscitation!" Although he had received emergency treatment, his heart stopped for a few seconds before beating weakly again. One of the nurses said in between panic, "There is still a chance, don't give up." After the situation had calmed down a bit, the room was filled with an increasingly pungent stench. The medical staff were forced to take turns going out to get some fresh air. Meanwhile, a nurse vomited in the corner of the room, unable to withstand the increasingly pungent smell. A ustaz came and recited a prayer softly near Samuel's head, then advised him to ask for forgiveness from Allah. Even so, Samuel only coughed dryly without being able to answer. "Istighfarullah, my brother," said the ustaz slowly. When night fell, the room became tense. From Samuel's mouth came the sound of screams, as if he was surrounded by something that made him afraid. A nurse whispered with a pale face, "As if there is something invisible here." Approaching the change of day, Samuel suddenly struggled with all his might. His hands clawed at the air, his eyes bulged in fear. Then he screamed loudly before finally collapsing weakly. Meanwhile, the doctor recorded a brief conclusion about his condition, not just a medical problem. The next morning, the medical staff found Samuel still alive, but his condition was very sad. His body was limp, with his face increasingly black, and some parts had rotted. A doctor covered his mouth while shuddering. "The patient's condition is getting worse," he muttered. The stench filled the isolation room, forcing the hospital to deploy additional air filters. However, it did not help much. A nurse said anxiously, "We have never handled a case like this before." When a burn specialist tried to touch the infected area, the flesh that was touched came off, creating a horrific scene. The doctor immediately stepped back, saying, "This is really beyond reason." Not long after, a security officer came with the results of a brief investigation. He told the medical team that CCTV footage showed Samuel's suspicious movements near the Hajar Aswad. Then the officer said seriously, "There are indications that he committed blasphemy." Hearing the report, the ustaz who happened to be at the location looked at each other with the medical officer. Then the ustaz said, "If that's true, hopefully he will be given the opportunity to repent." Meanwhile, the medical team did not know what to do. During treatment, Samuel had severe convulsions and had to be tied with a special rope to the bed. Every time he woke up, he would babble and say incoherent words like, "Hot? Please, Ada, let go." People guarding the room outside heard his screams, making the atmosphere even more tense. A congregation member who witnessed the incident prayed in a trembling voice, "O Allah, protect us all from danger." Towards noon, Samuel's body seemed to be shivering violently. His body temperature suddenly soared beyond normal limits, while the vital indicator machine recorded a condition that was almost dying. While the doctor prepared emergency equipment, he said, "We'll do our best." Although he was given additional IV fluids and painkillers, Samuel's condition did not improve. It was as if every medical effort had reached a dead end. A nurse who was holding a stethoscope to his chest said softly, "His heartbeat is getting weaker." A few moments later, the last scream echoed in the room. Samuel collapsed, his eyes bulging with fear, and his body stiffened before finally not moving at all. The doctor stared at the monitor that showed a straight line, then said briefly, "Dead." A few hours before his life truly ended, Samuel had time to write a letter on the hospital paper. With trembling hands, he wrote sentences containing religious insults and his cunning plans, while sweat mixed with blood dripped on the paper. The nurse on duty found the letter on the bedside table when she checked on Samuel's condition. With a shocked face, she said, "Sir, there is a message he wrote. Please read it." When the letter was opened, the contents revealed Samuel's plan to commit harassment in a holy place in order to corner this religion. In arrogant sentences, he wrote, "I prove that no power can stop me." The congregation who heard the contents of the confession looked at each other, while one of the community leaders muttered softly, "Astaghfirullah, how misguided his intentions are." This is a major sin that has finally been revealed. Allah is all-knowing. Hospital and security officers then checked Samuel's original identity records to ensure the truth of his confession. They nodded seriously. "This fact is in accordance with the findings of the CCTV recording," said an officer. The letter also explained in detail how he prepared fake documents, practiced prayer movements, and planned the moment of blasphemy. A ustaz could only hold his breath while whispering, "Allah has a way of retaliating." The entire Umrah group was stunned to learn that they had been deceived by Samuel's manipulative attitude. A female pilgrim could not help but shed tears. "We really didn't expect it," she said softly. Finally, Samuel's body was not recognized as Muslim, so the travel agency and local authorities coordinated to repatriate him. Meanwhile, the ustaz delivered a short message. "May this be a lesson for everyone." News of the punishment that befell a blasphemer of the Hajar Aswad immediately spread widely, becoming proof that holy places cannot be degraded arbitrarily. A religious figure then concluded in front of the congregation, "This story reminds us that the honor of religion must be maintained, and anyone who insults it will reap retribution." Friends of the Islamic faith who are blessed by Allah, I hope this video is useful, and see you in our next video.